Congressional District 2, Eastern Idaho, stretches from Boise to the Wyoming border. Incumbent Congressman Mike Simpson was first elected to serve District 2 in 1998. Roth is a consultant and father of two from Idaho Falls. He most recently challenged Mike Crapo for Senate in 2022. I spoke with Roth this week to talk about the race in Congressional District 2. Mr. Roth, thanks so much for joining us. What's your motivation for running for office?
I think that every candidate sees something different in why they need to run for office. And I've been involved in politics for quite a while. And this year, more than ever, I really think that I had to run because there are decisions being made affecting people's lives. People are dying, people are losing their rights. And at a certain point, we have to stand up and say enough is enough. And we have to continue to push forward for change.
You say people are dying. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing it every day in states across the country that have restrictive abortion bans, such as Idaho. We're seeing labor and delivery wards closing. We're seeing women, such as the woman in Georgia, who are dying because they're being denied access to care. We're seeing even in states that don't have restrictive abortion bans, like California, we're seeing women being turned away at emergency rooms and told that you need to drive 80 miles to another hospital. Here's a bucket and some towels in case anything happens. These are basic rights, and the right to feel safe and have your healthcare needs met. They shouldn't vary from state to state. It shouldn't matter if you're in Idaho or Washington or Oregon or Wisconsin or Minnesota. What those basic human rights are should be the same regardless of where you live. We're one country. And so I think that people are actually, it's not an exaggeration to say that people are dying. We look at the epidemics of gun violence in this country. It continues to get higher and higher. And thoughts and prayers just aren't cutting it anymore. So we have children in classrooms who are dying because we failed to take even basic actions. You have huge increases in suicide rates and attacks within the LGBTQIA plus community, especially in the transgender community, which is seeing themselves as the absolute target for a tremendous amount of attacks, which they already have a higher propensity for suicide and hate crimes and attacks and those types of things to begin with. And when we're starting to legislate that hate through harmful laws, both on the state level and on the national level, we're once again just increasing the stress on those communities. And so it's time to recognize that we're all in this together, and our goal should be to build a stronger, better, happier country together, not by dividing off specific groups.
Going back to the abortion issue, you've said you would vote to restore Roe versus Wade, ensuring bodily autonomy is recognized and protected for all women. But how would you work to effect that without a seat on the Supreme Court? Do you believe that the Congress could pass some sort of national abortion law, and what should that look like in your eyes?
So I think that, we've talked about it several times. Vice President Harris has talked about it. We had Roe v. Wade for over 50 years in this country. It was the law of the land. And the Supreme Court did choose to strip those important protections away. It's up to Congress, has the ability to pass laws to protect those rights, much like we pass laws protecting any number of other rights throughout the country. And there is absolutely a danger that the Supreme Court could continue to set precedent and their longstanding settled law aside and try to overrule that. But I think that we can't govern our country by sitting down and being afraid of what one group of people in a building in DC are going to do. We need to start doing what's right. And if they continue to push back and try to take away those rights, then there are other options that we'll have to look at. We've already seen the Biden administration proposing some reforms for the Supreme Court, such as term limits, such as a binding code of ethics. And I think that many in this country can agree that we want to have confidence that our Supreme Court is acting in an ethical manner. And so I think that, and more that you're seeing coming out, some things are being questioned there. Um, I do think that there is option also to look at the number of justices that are on the court. For throughout our country's history, we've seen that number of justices fluctuate. Congress does have the ability to adjust that number. The number of justices is not constitutionally mandated. And traditionally, each justice has been responsible for one appellate court district, but we have 13 appellate court districts and only 9 justices. So some are having to double up. So there certainly is precedent for matching that number of justices to those appellate courts. And I think that at a certain point, we have to start looking at how our institutions may no longer be acting in the best interest, and the powers that are given to the people to adjust that. We don't have to have revolutions and wars. Our Constitution has granted the power to the people to, when they are not happy with the way things are going, to make a difference. I also think that one of the reasons you've seen some of these really extreme laws come into place is because the other side of the aisle has found that they can do these things and there's virtually no cost to them. There's no reason to hold accountable. It doesn't particularly cost them in elections. It doesn't cost them with their donors. And so there's really no reason, if they're not listening to the people, to change the way that they're acting, because traditionally they're not being held accountable. And so turning a red seat like District 2 in Idaho, I think really sends a message to many of those extremists out there that enough is enough, that we've pushed the people far enough, and maybe they need to start thinking less about winning points for their donors and for their special interest groups and their side, and more about what's best for the people, because ultimately in our country, the people have the final say.
As you've been running for this seat, of course, you're a Democratic nominee in Idaho, which is a very deeply partisan Republican state. What sort of reception have you gotten from voters who, in your eyes, their elected officials are not representing them, but they keep voting for those officials? How do you explain that interplay?
So the majority of the people that I actually meet, whether it's at events or just out in the community, are actually quite receptive to hearing what I have to say. They are very disappointed with the way that Simpson has been representing them for nearly a quarter of a century. One of the biggest challenges that you find, though, is that in our system of government, incumbents have a tremendous advantage. And there are a lot of people out there that we simply can't reach and talk to about our message, or who have disengaged from the political process pretty much at all, other than showing up to vote, and they're just voting straight down the party that they've always voted, not really realizing how much that party has actually changed. And so I think that, one of the biggest obstacles we have to overcome is actually getting our message out there and actually getting people to compare and contrast. And the incumbents have a tremendous advantage in that. They can very easily get op-eds and pieces printed in the media, because they're not getting printed as a candidate or nominee. They're getting printed as the sitting lawmaker. And so when you do have opportunities to try to contrast, such as debates or endorsement interviews, the Republicans don't show. We're having this interview because Mike Simpson didn't bother to respond to the request for the debate. And so I think that you have to really look at, they're not willing to stand by their policies and allow those to be contrasted or compared, because it doesn't do them any, there's no benefit for them. They know that the less people know about what they're actually doing, the better off that they are. And you see it all the time. We have 2 years ago, the Chips and Science Act passed. Every single member of the Idaho delegation, including Mike Simpson, voted against that bill. However, they all showed up at the 2-year anniversary to take the tour of the $25 billion plant that Micron is building near Boise, and to take credit for bringing that investment to Idaho. And so when people see that side, but they don't see the side of, hey, actually the Idaho delegation voted against this, then I think that the voters aren't being given the information to make that educated decision. And I realize that the onus is on me as a candidate to get that message out there and the word out there. But we're in a red state. If you look at the races, they're completely unbalanced financially.
All right.
Mike Simpson has 15 times the resources that I have. And in my Senate race in 2022, Crapo spent just about, between him and independent expenditures, about 10 million versus about the 105,000 that we were able to spend. So in reality, I don't believe that the average Idaho voter really has been given the information to make an informed decision.
All right, David. Well, I am going to have to cut you off there. David Roth, Democratic candidate for Congressional District 2, thanks so much for making time for us this week.
No problem.